Okay, good morning, everybody. And I apologize. This is just a very, very short little video, but my uh, video editing skills are not good enough to add something to the longer video that is coming. So this just discusses the first couple of slides in this slide set. And then you go on to the other longer video, please. So we're now going to move on to discussing actual uh, organisms, if you want to think of them that way, microbes in their different forms, and especially we're going to be concentrating on disease that they cause. Now, I hesitated when I said microbes because our first set, we are going to be discussing the viruses. And of course, viruses are not living entities. And so you can't really include them in with the microbes, which are all living. But nonetheless, of course, they are tremendously, tremendously important, especially in health sciences. We'll also, at the end, just mention two very strange groups, the viroids and prions. But that will be no more than a slide or two at the very end of our discussion about viruses. So here, let's think about some of the general characteristics of viruses. The first is that the viruses are not alive. They are not living entities, and they are, in fact, obligate intracellular parasites. They have no ability to reproduce on their own. In order to reproduce, they require a living cell, a host cell, in order to multiply. And all of the components of new viruses are manufactured using the cellular machinery of the host cell. So you can think of it in a way that viruses enter a host cell and they turn it into a viral factory. That process may be extremely complex. We will only ever discuss it in relatively simple terms. But here are some of the reasons. Here's one of the major reasons why we don't consider viruses to be alive. All living things use DNA as the foundation of all of their metabolism, because the DNA contains all of the recipes, as we know now, for all of the enzymes and proteins and everything else that is going to drive metabolism in the cell. But viruses do not necessarily have DNA. It depends upon the virus. There are a large number of viruses. Some of the most important human viruses, for example, contain RNA, not DNA, as their nucleic material, as their material of heredity. There are many viruses that do contain DNA as well, but there are no viruses which contain both DNA and RNA. They either have DNA or they have RNA. Depends on the virus that you're talking about. All viruses have a strand of nucleic acid at the very minimum, and surrounding that strand of nucleic acid, they have a protein coat. Inside that coat, in addition to the nucleic acid, they may have some other things as well. They may have accessory proteins, for example, polymerases for polymerizing nucleic acids. That's one. And they may also have enzymes such as proteases. Protease is something that cuts protein into pieces. When we look at the virus particle itself, that at the very minimum, that is what they have. They have nucleic acid. They have a protein coat around that nucleic acid, which is called the capsid. But inside that capsid, apart from the nucleic acid, there is no cytoplasm. There is no cellular machinery. There are no ribosomes. Nothing like that occurs because they have no metabolism. So they simply don't need it. And especially when we look at them, there is no management of energy by the viral particle. There's no ATP generating mechanism, for example, because they have no metabolism. They don't need all of that stuff. So the second thing about viruses they are all extremely small, most very, very, very much smaller than bacteria. And if you just have a look at this diagram here, this is a human red blood corpuscle here, just for size comparison. And here is an E. coli cell. Well, you can see just part of it. And here is one of the smallest of all of the bacteria, and this is chlamydia. Chlamydia is extremely small, a tenth of the size of an E. coli cell. Interestingly enough, chlamydia is also an obligate intracellular parasite. In order to get this small, it loses much of its cellular machinery and instead comes to depend upon cellular machinery of its host. And this is something which is characteristic of the viruses. Now here are two of the larger viruses, but they're large only in that they are long. This is Ebola virus, and this is a virus of bacteria. Bacteria have their own viruses, and this is one here, one of the longer ones. But most of the viruses, as you can see here, most of them are extremely small. And one of the questions that we have about viruses is how they arose. Where did they come from and how did they evolve? We think, the current thinking is that they evolved from the progressive decrease in size and cellular machinery of bacteria such as chlamydia. That is only one theory about their origin, but it's currently the most prevalent. They evolved from very, very small bacteria, such as chlamydia, and another group that we'll hear about when we talk about bacterial disease called the rickettsias. So they are just things which have become progressively reduced in complexity to their very essence, which is a nucleic acid with instructions in the nucleic acid to make viral particles. And that nucleic acid is then surrounded by a protein coat, a protective coat called the capsid. There may be further elaboration on that, but at its very simplest, that is what a virus is. So the longer video that I'm going to do will commence with this. It's worth repeating. I'll simply say that viruses tend to be very, very specific. Every single living organism, every type of living organism has its own group of viruses that will attack it. There are even viruses which have to attack other viruses in order to reproduce. There are viruses which glom onto another virus and then infect a host cell. There are very, very complex life cycles that we're going to see, but viruses tend to be extremely specific. And when we look at which hosts they can infect, we call that the host range. Some viruses have a broader host range. They can infect a wide variety of organisms, but others have a very, very narrow host range. So for example, rabies virus can infect any mammal. Measles can only infect apes, human beings included. But there are other viruses like human immunodeficiency virus, HIV, which only infect human. So you understand that it depends on the virus what its host range is. But it also needs to be recognized that within that host, there is a range of cells which the virus can actually infect. And that itself may be very narrow. So I'll stop there, and then please just go straight on to the longer video that is going to be presented for you, okay?